It was a time when the earth still held the fragrance of Eden. The rivers ran clear as glass, and the winds carried whispered secrets that only the first men could understand. The Watchers, ancient spirits, angels of elevated rank, observed everything from the heavens, from the highest vertices of the firmament, from the spheres of light that encircled the throne of the Most High. They were immortal, they were magnificent, and they began to look upon the daughters of men. But the heavens fell silent. Thunder split the firmament like swords of fire. Celestial floodgates swung open. Mountains trembled beneath the footsteps of creatures no mortal had ever faced. Colossal screams echoed through the valleys like the roar of a storm given flesh. Blood seeped from the stones. The ocean, ravenous, swallowed entire cities in a single night. Temples collapsed upon their own priests. Furnaces exploded. Black smoke buried the sun. When the waters finally receded, all that remained were monstrous bones scattered through the mud. The sons of the fallen gods had been torn from the world, but the echo of their passing would travel across millennia, whispered in the scrolls of the Dead Sea, carved into Sumerian tablets, remembered in the traditions of Mesopotamia, reverberating from Genesis through the accounts of the prophets, repeated in every civilization that rose from the ashes of that drowned world. This is the oldest and most terrifying story ever set down by humankind. The truth about the Nephilim. Two names in particular would mark the memory of the centuries. One would be spoken in whispers by the sages of antiquity as a synonym for the first great betrayal against the Creator. The other would be cursed in Scripture as the source of a single forbidden art that would destroy more men than all the wars of history combined. Those names, and the knowledge they brought to earth, would shape the destiny of the entire human race. The story of the Nephilim begins in a single paragraph of the book of Genesis, in the 6th chapter, verses 1 through 4, a passage as brief as it is enigmatic. It is written there that when men began to multiply upon the face of the earth, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took for themselves whichever ones they chose. And that from that union, that crossing contrary to every principle of the created order, were born the giants, the Nephilim, the fallen ones, the ones who throw down, those who make others fall. For centuries, that paragraph remained an enigma wrapped in silence. But in the 2nd century before the Common Era, in scrolls hidden in the caves near the Dead Sea at Qumran, a far older book was preserved, the Book of Enoch, attributed to the patriarch Enoch, the 7th direct descendant of Adam, according to Hebrew tradition, the very one who walked with God and was taken up alive at the age of 365. This text details what Genesis only implies, and what it describes is staggering. According to the Book of Enoch, chapter 6, 200 watchers, angels of an order called the Grigori, the ones who keep watch, descended to earth in the ancient days. They did not come to serve. They came to take. They assembled on the summit of Mount Hermon. At the far northern edge of the Promised Land, a range of eternal snow that rose above the clouds. There, beneath the pale light of the full moon, they swore a mutual oath. Each one pronounced a curse upon himself, binding himself to the pact, vowing that none of them would retreat. That mountain, the ancient texts say, received the name Hermon precisely because of that anathema, the oath of the fallen. And then, beneath that same pale moonlight, they descended, like living shadows, like silent storms, like gods who chose to trade the glory of heaven for the dust of the earth. The world, unknowing, drew its last breaths of innocence. The geography of the fall is precise. Mount Hermon rises 2,814 meters above sea level, in what is today the border region between Lebanon, Syria, and the Golan Heights. Its snows feed the Jordan River. Its peaks were considered sacred from time immemorial. And it was there, exactly there, according to the record of Enoch, that the first great angelic sin descended upon the world. At the head of the 200 watchers stood Shemiaza, also rendered Semjaza, Shemihaza, or Azaziel, depending on the manuscript tradition. His name meant, "he who sees the name," a direct allusion to his ancient post among the heavenly hosts, where he would have known the highest mysteries of creation. He was the one who had hesitated according to the texts. He was the one who told his companions that he feared bearing the punishment of that pact alone, and he was the one who, despite that fear, led the others to earth. His hesitation did not save him. It only made the fall more tragic. Behind him came the other chiefs. The texts preserve their names in lists that read almost liturgically, each name carrying its own weight and its own forbidden specialty. Arachiel would teach the signs of the earth, reading the veins of the soil, the way a priest reads the entrails of an animal. Kokabel would reveal the mysteries of the stars. Sariel would disclose the movements of the moon and the secrets of eclipses. Penemu would reveal the art of writing on clay tablets, the craft of reed and ink that would seal pacts and enslave men under eternal debts. Gadrael would introduce the weapons of death and the arts of war. Barakel would teach astrology. Ezekiel, the reading of clouds, each one with his portion, each one with his river of fire poured upon an unsuspecting humanity. And then there was Azazel. Azazel was, according to the book of Enoch, chapter 8, the most terrible of all. To him is attributed the teaching of how to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. To him is attributed the revelation of the secrets of metals, copper, tin, bronze, iron. To him is attributed the showing of cosmetics to women, the gleam of pigments on the eyes, gold melted into ornaments for the neck, seduction transformed into a weapon. And it was that art, the art of adornment and metallurgy combined, that, according to the texts, most deeply corrupted the human soul. War became possible, luxury became irresistible, and humanity began to devour itself. The ancient rabbis would later say that each of the watchers taught an art that appeared to be a gift and was, in truth, a chain. Celestial knowledge poured into human minds that were not yet ready for it. Forbidden wisdom torn from the higher spheres and hurled into the dust, and the result of that transmission was swift, it was devastating, it was irreversible. But the corruption did not come from knowledge alone, it came also from flesh. Each watcher chose for himself a wife, not one, not two, many, the most beautiful, the youngest, the most defenseless, and those unions, unnatural, monstrous, contrary to every order of creation, produced the Nephilim, the sons of the fallen gods and the daughters of men. And the Nephilim were not ordinary children. When the first of them were born, the midwives fled. The newborns weighed 3 times what a human infant weighed. They grew in months what an ordinary man took decades to grow. Within a few years, they surpassed 3 meters in height. Within a few generations, some reached statures that Mesopotamian tradition and the Enochic texts describe as immense. Giants who looked down from the tops of trees, whose steps carved furrows into the ground, whose voices resonated like the rumble of boulders rolling down a mountainside. The ancient texts speak of creatures said to reach 3,000 cubits in some traditions, numbers plainly symbolic, but carrying the weight of a memory of something monstrous, something vast, something contrary to the very biological limits of the human body. They were sons of 2 natures, and for that they were cursed from birth. They carried within them the strength and the longevity of their heavenly fathers, but also the mortality and the hunger of their human mothers. And it was that hunger that transformed them into a nightmare. The book of Enoch, chapter 7, is explicit. When the resources of the earth ceased to be sufficient, the Nephilim turned against men. They devoured livestock, they devoured grain, they stripped entire granaries in a single meal. And then, when even that was not enough, They began to devour one another, and finally to devour humanity itself. The texts do not soften this passage. The ancients saw in it the total collapse of the moral order, creation inverted, man reduced to prey in his own world. The earth, say the prophets, began to cry out. It cried out for the rivers poisoned with blood. It cried out for the forests trampled underfoot. It cried out for the fields ruined by the weight of the colossi. It cried out for the children torn from their mothers. It cried out for the women torn apart. It cried out for the old men abandoned in empty huts. And the echoes of that cry, as the book of Enoch records in chapter 8, ascended to the heavenly throne like a single plea. In that time, according to Hebrew tradition, men still lived for hundreds of years. Adam had reached 930. Seth lived to 912. Methuselah, the grandfather of Noah, would live 969 years, the longest life in all of Scripture. But under the reign of the giants, human life began to contract. Unknown diseases arose from the impure mixing of bloodlines. Plagues swept through cities. Children were born deformed. Freshwater springs ran red. The air carried the permanent smell of carrion and the smoke of Azazel's furnaces, where metal was melted into molds of death. The Nephilim, nonetheless, multiplied. Generation after generation, their lineage spread across the lands of Canaan, through the valleys of the Euphrates, across the plains of Syria, pressing south to the coasts where the Canaanite kingdoms would later rise. Later texts would call the residual descendants of those first colossi the Anakim, the Rephim, the Emim, the Zamzumim, and the Gibborim. But the heart of their dynasty lay in the plains that would later be swept clean by the waters. 4 archangels watched everything: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, the 4 pillars of the throne, and their voices joined in a cry before the Most High. "See what Azazel has done," they said, according to the book of Enoch, chapter 9. "See the blood poured out upon the earth. See the souls of the dead crying out to the very gates of heaven." And heaven answered. Before the answer came down in water and fire, heaven sent a warning. One man was chosen, a single man who, according to the traditions, still walked in integrity among his generation. His name was Noah, son of Lamech, grandson of Methuselah, great-grandson of Enoch, the same Enoch who had walked with God and been taken alive into the heavens, leaving behind a written record of everything he had witnessed concerning the watchers and their cursed children. Noah was given a plan, an ark of gopher wood, sealed with pitch inside and out, 300 cubits in length, 50 cubits in width, 30 cubits in height, 3 decks, a single door, a single window above. Those measurements in ancient equivalences come close to 133 meters in length, 22 in width, and 13 in height. A colossal vessel for an era that had never known ocean navigation. For decades, Noah built. He drove timber into timber under the sun and under the rain. He was insulted, mocked, and beaten by the Nephilim who passed by. Tradition holds that he preached to men even as he built the vessel, warning them, imploring them to repent. But humanity, drunk on forbidden knowledge and on blood, laughed. The giants laughed the loudest. The earth fell silent. And then, in a single day, the sky broke open. It was in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of that fateful year, according to the count in the book of Genesis, chapter 7, verse 11, that the fountains of the great deep burst apart, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. The clouds exploded, the subterranean waters erupted outward, the sea hurled itself upon dry land, and it rained. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, without pause, without respite, without mercy. The Nephilim ran for the high ground. They climbed mountains. They scaled trees. They piled themselves atop the tallest structures of their cities, screaming, beating their fists against the sky, cursing the winds. Rabbinic traditions say that some tried to stop the cracks in the deep with their own hands and were crushed by the torrents. Others drew on their colossal strength to tear boulders loose and build walls, and the waves rolled over them as if they were foam. Others still, according to late Hebrew legends, seized hold of the sides of the ark and were hurled back into the waters by the very hand of the Most High. Entire cities vanished. Ziggurats sank. The temples of the metallurgy that Azazel had taught collapsed with their bronze altars. The texts describe the sound, a single continuous sound, deafening, composed of the burst of the waters, the shriek of trees uprooted at the base, the bellow of wild animals in panic, the howl of drowning giants, a sound that lasted for weeks, a sound that seemed like the lamentation of the entire world dying all at once. Rain, stone, blood, silence. The ark, rocking on the chaos, was the only thing that held, alone, small against the waves, carrying 1 man, 3 sons, 4 women, and the memory of all animal creation preserved by human hands. The waters rose 15 cubits above the highest mountains. The peaks of the greatest ranges disappeared beneath the current, and the giants, every last one of the Nephilim, perished. The Enochic texts are categorical. The line of the Colossi was extinguished. Their souls, according to the Book of Enoch, could neither rest as the souls of the righteous, nor ascend as the souls of the pure, for they were hybrids, and the spiritual world held no place for them. They became, as the tradition holds, wandering spirits, bodiless demons, drifting among men, tormenting the generations that followed, whispering at the ears of the descendants of Shem and Ham, reminding the living of what had been lost beneath the waters. As for the Watchers, the immortal fathers, the punishment was different. They could not be killed by water, for they were not made of flesh, but the Most High sent the archangels. Raphael received the order to bind Azazel. He bound him hand and foot. He cast him into a dark fissure in the desert of Dudael and piled rough, jagged stones over him until the light no longer touched him. There he would remain until the day of the great judgment, according to the Book of Enoch, chapter 10. Gabriel was sent against the bastards and the reprobate, against the children of fornication. Michael was sent against Shemyaza and his associates, to bind them for 70 generations in the subterranean valleys of the earth, until the day the eternal judgment was carried out. And Uriel was sent to Noah to prepare the way of his salvation. The fall of the Watchers was complete. When, in the 7th month, on the 17th day, according to chapter 8 of Genesis, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, the world was a different world. There were no more cities, no more cultivated fields, no more the roar of Colossi, only mud, only silence, only the faint moan of wind across the face of a freshly washed earth, and the sweet, bitter smell of rotting roots pushing up toward a tentative sun. Noah descended and built an altar. He offered sacrifice, and he received the sign of the rainbow, the ancient promise that those waters would never return in that form. But the memory of the Nephilim had not died with their bodies. It persisted. It insisted. It reappeared. Later, Hebrew texts affirm that, even after the flood, giants once again appeared in the land. Not like the first ones, for the first heavenly fathers were in chains, but as residual descendants who somehow surfaced again among the nations of Canaan. The Anakim, descendants of Anak, were so tall that the 12 spies sent by Moses into the south of the Promised Land, according to the Book of Numbers, chapter 13, returned terrified, saying they had felt like grasshoppers before them. Og, king of Bashan, slept in an iron bed 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, approximately 4 meters by 2, as recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 3, verse 11, and Goliath, the Philistine of Gath, rose before the troops of Saul, measuring 6 cubits and a span, close to 3 meters, clad in bronze armor, weighing 5,000 shekels, before he fell to a stone hurled by a young shepherd named David, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zamzumim, each people eliminated in successive conquests slowly over the centuries that followed, in a purging that appeared, in the eyes of the prophets, to be the long-delayed fulfillment of a sentence even older than themselves. The land was purging the last echoes of the pact of Mount Hermon, and every victory of Israel over those peoples was, in a certain sense, one more shovelful of earth cast upon the grave of a cursed age. And the watchers, they remain, according to tradition, bound in darkness until the final judgment. The Apostle Jude in the New Testament, in verse 6 of his brief epistle, reaffirms that image. The angels, who did not keep their own position of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, have been kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Peter, in his second epistle, chapter 2, verse 4, repeats the same warning. The ancient chains have not yet been broken. The sentence still awaits execution. The memory of the Nephilim has traveled across the millennia in waves. The Sumerians spoke of the Apkallu, sages who came from the waters, who taught men metallurgy, writing, and astronomy. The Akkadians and Babylonians told, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, of a devastating flood sent by the gods against a humanity grown too loud. The Greeks, centuries later, would recount the tales of the Titans and the giants defeated by the Olympians. The Hittites, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, the Hindus, the Aztecs, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, each culture preserved in distorted form the echo of the same catastrophe. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1947 and 1956 in the caves of Qumran, preserved fragments of what is called the Book of Giants, attributed to the same Enochic tradition in which figures such as Ohya, Hahya, and the giant Gilgamesh appear among the cursed sons of the Watchers, a literary suture that reinforces the absolute antiquity of this narrative. And the name of Azazel still resonates in the ritual of the Day of Atonement described in the book of Leviticus, chapter 16, where the scapegoat was sent into the desert carrying the sins of the people, a liturgical echo of the same being who had been bound in the sand. The earth, today, does not remember the footsteps of the giants, but in the scriptures, in the Talmud, in the Ethiopic codices that have preserved the Book of Enoch in its entirety to this day, the story remains. Motionless, lucid, terrifying. Mount Hermon still rises beneath its snow, the Dead Sea still guards its scrolls, and the echo of that ancient oath, sworn by 200 immortal beings beneath the pale light of the moon, still passes through human memory like a warning that has never been fully understood. The sons of God looked upon the daughters of men, and the world was never the same again.